I'm so happy.
Why are you so happy? Because Mumba is dead. Yes, it must be.
Some even think he's coming back. He'll come back with 2 less teeth in the front.
On January 1st, more than 6 months after Congo's independence, the whole world discovered with me the horrifying images of the arrest of Congo's Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, who was tied up, treated like an animal, and beaten up before being loaded onto a plane bound for Katanga. I remind him that once in Katanga, he was tortured before being shot. Behind this arrest and murder, there were Congolese, Belgians, French, and Americans. Why was everyone so determined to see this man disappear? That's what we're going to find out now. But before we talk about Patrice Lumumba's assassination, let's take a look at the man himself to see his background and understand how we got here. Patrice Emery Lumumba was born in Congo in 1925. He attended missionary and Protestant schools. It should be remembered that these schools are not intended to turn the children they teach into future intellectuals or leaders. They were just very basic courses. But Patrice Lumumba, unlike the other children of his generation, was to distinguish himself by an unrivaled intellectual appetite and curiosity, which made him a very bright pupil. But at the age of 8, he dropped out of school, because education is all very well, but there are other priorities. He had to earn his own living. As a result, he took on a number of odd jobs around the country, including working as an office clerk in a mine in South Kivu. Of course, he had many breaks in the country, but during this experience, he realized that the country was being plundered. The country's natural resources are being plundered by Western companies. Much later, he also had work experience in the province of Kasai, and there, he will have a front row seat to a segregation that does not speak its name. Congolese in their own country have no access to cinemas, hotels, or theaters, whilst white people have free access and unlimited passes to these places. What's more, the Congolese live in overcrowded, overprivileged areas, while the white people live in castles with swimming pools. The Congolese don't go out at certain times. In short, he realizes that there's a segregation that doesn't say its name. In that moment, he became close to a number of intellectuals, and they began to debate issues affecting the Congo. In the 50s, he gets a job as a journalist in a local media outlet and started writing articles. Writing articles and poems to describe and denounce what was happening in the Congo, his desire for independence, to write about inequalities, and very clearly, through his writings, he will begin to have a certain authority, and in that moment, he'll be in the crosshairs of the Belgian authorities. Before becoming a teacher, he worked as a letter carrier at the post office. He had a job delivering letters, if I'm not mistaken. In short, a letter carrier's job at the post office. Anyway, you get the idea. But in 256, Belgium invited him. Well, he was invited to go and study in Belgium. And on his return, he was arrested for embezzling postal checks, if I can put it that way. So, the point is not to say that Patrice Lumumba was innocent or that he was wrongly accused. Far be it from me. I wasn't there, so I'm not going to start rewriting history. But Patrice Lumumba's arrest was a response to a real need. The guy was starting to have a lot of clout, people were starting to listen to him, so we had to slow him down and discredit him with the Congolese. Except that by arresting him, by putting him in prison for about a year, when he gets out, Patrice Lumumba enjoys greater popularity. Because the Congolese say to themselves, the guy was decrying certain things. And as soon as he started decrying them, he was arrested. On top of that, Patrice Lumumba, after his arrest, will have immense credibility with other nationalists because they will realize that the guy is really determined to continue his fight. So he gets out of prison and arrives the year off. It was during this year that Patrice Lumumba's political career, determination and ambition for independence really took another turn. In April of the same year, he arrived in Brussels for an exhibition called the Brussels World Fair. There he realized that Africans, blacks and Congolese were treated like animals. They're objectified, they're minimized, they're lowered to the ground. And it was there too that he discovered a habit that was really in vogue in Europe at the time, human zoos. In other words, you take a place, create a zoo, have enclosures, bring in black people, who sometimes acted as animals. They were photographed, white people came to spend Sundays with the children, and we saw black people acting as animals. So it creates in him a feeling of revolt. So when he returned to the Congo, he joined forces with these intellectual families to create the MNC, the Congo National Movement. At the time, this was not the only party in the Congolese political landscape. There was also an association called ABACO, and this party differed somewhat from the MNC. Admittedly, this party also wants independence, but above all, it advocates cultural valorization of the Bakongo language. So, as you can see, while independence is certainly on the agenda, it's not the same positioning. And so, in this context, the party was created. But there was also another event that really strengthened Patrick Lumumba's position, that the Congo must achieve independence. In MNC again, there was the Congress of African Countries. It took place in Accra. He went there and met people like Kwame Nkrumah, people like Félix Moumié, people like Frantz Fanon. And he goes there, Ghana is already independent. So he arrives in an African country that is already independent. While his country was still seeing the dark, so he returns to the Congo with even greater fervor. He told himself that the country had to be independent, and just as well because not even a year later, on the 1st of January of MNC, there were demonstrations and gatherings of Congolese to talk about independence, to denounce a little of the inequalities to which they were victims, to denounce the poverty in which they were living.
The month of January 4th, 1959, Leopoldville, Emu. The end of a dream and a myth. At a Lavako meeting banned by the authorities, the crowd went wild. Scenes of looting and destruction ensued. For the first time ever, there were cries of hatred for Europeans.
Liv and the Belgian authorities, with the help of their police force, will put down this demonstration in blood. The Belgians announced that 40 people had died. The pennies say 800 and 500 dead. So you can see the difference in the figures. Go and choose the real version for yourself. And after this demonstration, the Congolese revolted. They began to boycott the Belgian authorities. And the Belgian authorities tried to calm things down. They're going to tell the Congolese that your living conditions will be improved. Besides, we're going to organize local elections. You don't have to be a political scientist to realize that this was all a sham. Because a few months later, in October of MNC, Mouvement National des Congolais, the aim of this gathering was to stage a small demonstration at which Patrice Umar and his friends would give a speech about the situation of the Congolese people, about independence. And the Belgians are aware of one thing: Patrice Umar has an impressive charisma. He held the audience spellbound. His oratory is highly developed, so it would be very bad to let him express himself like that. So they're going to disperse the crowd. There, people will die. They'll kill 30 Congolese. Tensions will be at their height. The Congolese will begin to reveal themselves throughout the country. What's more, Patrice Umar was arrested in the process. He was tried and sentenced to 6 months in prison. We are in January of MNC. So the Congolese people are gathering across the country. But the Belgians are quite happy because the man they were worried about, the man who was bothering them, has been arrested. They can rest easy. And what's even better is that they're going to organize a conference in Berlin, or rather Brussels, where they're going to bring together the entire Congolese political class for a discussion. And then the situation changed. The entire Congolese political class is demanding Patrice Umar's immediate release. Otherwise, no discussion. So, in the same month, January of MNC, Patrice Umar was released and left for this Congress with the entire political class. And there, clearly, they want one thing: independence.
Nothing can be decided anymore in Belgium or in the Congo without our assent. This magnificent result, achieved through peaceful and friendly negotiations, gives us great pleasure. Belgium has understood the price we attach to our freedom and human dignity.
It is a great and formidable adventure. await you. And as you know, that in many circles, we would have preferred, and I'd be inclined to say personally, that if we had been able, in complete freedom, to examine this problem, we would have wished in your interest that their stages successive, so that gradually, with maximum safety, you can familiarize yourself with the responsibilities involved by taking them on, partially every year. You told us it couldn't be done, and we agreed that it was. It wasn't possible, given the current of liberation in Africa. It was not possible, and although up to now you have, to a far lesser extent than other territories, been involved in your administration, it was not possible to deny you any longer this major promotion and to become a fully independent state, master of its own destiny.
Many subjects will be dealt with, including Katanga. We'll come back to that later. But after this conference, in Brussels, they decided to organize elections. So the elections have been organized. Several parties are competing. In the end, the MNC won the vote needed to govern the country. Patrice Lumumba will therefore reach out to Joseph Kasavubu. Roughly speaking, they formed an alliance government. Patrice Lumumba becomes prime minister. Joseph Kasavubu becomes president. But in reality, it's the prime minister who really has the power. This brings us to the Congo's independence. I told you in the beginning of the video, or in the first part for that matter, that Belgium didn't give the Congo its independence out of the blue. They gave independence to the Congo, and I quote, so they could have moderate leaders with whom they could collaborate. In other words, on paper, the Congo would be independent, but in real life, they would run the Congo. They'd have a free hand to siphon and pillage the Congo as they've always done. In fact, why stop, given that they've always done it? In this context, they really hope they can continue to do what they've always done, except that Patrice Lumumba is not the profile they were expecting. I've scoured a lot of sources. Some sources even say that when Patrice Lumumba won the elections, Belgium didn't recognize his victory, but I prefer to go for things that are much more tangible. I'm telling you that he won outright, but basically, it wasn't the profile he wanted. Because Patrice Lumumba became president. It was against this backdrop that King Baudouin arrived and made his speech. Here's an extract.
Is the culmination of the work conceived by the genius of King Leopold II, undertaken by him with tenacious courage and continued with perseverance by Belgium. It marks a decisive moment in the destiny not only of the Congo itself, but I have no hesitation in affirming it, of Africa as a whole. For 80 years, Belgium has sent to your soil the best of its sons. First and foremost, to free the Congo Basin from the odious slave trade that was decimating its populations. Secondly, to bring closer together former ethnic admirers who once admired each other are about to form the largest independent state in Africa. And finally, to recall to a happier life the various regions of the Congo which you represent here, united in the same parliament. Belgian agents are ready to offer you their loyal and enlightened collaboration.
And Patrice Lumumba is going to retract.
I ask you to make of this game an illustrious date that you will keep indelibly engraved in your hearts a date, the significance of which you will proudly to your children, so that they, in turn, teach their sons to their sons and grandchildren the glorious story of our struggle for freedom. Now, for this independence of the Congo, if proclaimed today in agreement with Belgium, a friendly country with which we deal as equals, nor the Congolese of one of these names will ever be able to forget that it was through struggle that it was won. An everyday struggle, an ardent and idealistic struggle, a struggle in which we did not mix neither our strengths, nor our privations, nor our suffering, nor our blood. This struggle that flees tears, fires, and blood, we are proud of it to the very depths of our being. Subtitles by the Amara.org community.
So at the end of this day of King Baudouin had a note of hope, because he had said to himself that Patrice Lumumba was yet another African president who talked a lot, who prattled a lot, but who didn't act, except that he was profoundly mistaken. Following events consolidated his fears, reinforced his concerns. Indeed, there's one thing you need to know. Since independence, the Congolese army has been essentially made up of Congolese. But the army's leaders and top brass were, for the most part, Belgians. And so the Congolese are independent. Congolese soldiers are beginning to say that they no longer wanted Belgians in their army. And the Belgians, so condescending, so pseudo, certain ranks of the Belgians, self-righteous and arrogant, confidently announced the renowned equation from their army to the Congolese. The Congo before independence is equal to the Congo after independence. And then clashes and tensions ensue, which would be a perfect excuse for Belgium to send in Belgian soldiers, paratroopers, and all the rest. So some Belgians are evacuated. And then, of course, you think I'm exaggerating when I say that's a perfect excuse. They sent soldiers to defend their nationals. You'll understand from the rest of the story that it was very, 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 very perfidious of them. In the wake of these tensions, Belgium expected Patrice Lumumba to condemn the army and to ease the situation. He did indeed ease tensions, but he clearly said that Belgium and the Belgians must stay where they belong, and that the army is not for the Belgians. The Congolese army must become Africanized. And the Belgians clearly don't like that, especially since Patrice Lumumba was not always hostile to Belgium. For many years, he made it clear that Belgium was not necessarily a country to be hostile towards, and he made that clear several times. But reality made him realize that he had to change his physical color, and that the Belgians were not people who were willing to achieve independence for the Congo. Roughly speaking, Patrice Lumumba condemned the presence of Belgians in the army. In other words, the army was right. And quite clearly from that moment on, what he didn't know was that he had 6 months to live. Le Lecture Le Diakatanga province announces that it is seceding, and it also announces that it is independent. There. You hear Katanga, you hear secession, you hear independence. No, inside Congo itself, you're thinking, what the hell is he talking about? Let me explain. It's true that the Congo is rich overall, but the region where the mines are concentrated is Katanga. And Belgium, when it sees that the Congo is in the process of giving them away because Patrice Lumumba is playing the revolutionary, Belgium is in a bad way. Belgium has sent soldiers into the Congo, supposedly to protect its nationals. But most of these soldiers headed for Katanga, supposedly to protect the Belgians living there. But the truth is that they went to arm, train, finance, and instrumentalize Katanga so that it would separate from the Congo, because if Katanga separates from the Congo, they'll still be able to siphon off and exploit the region's mineral resources.
Bayuatsi Rene Small, a military intelligence officer, is sent to Katanga.
And if it hadn't been for the courage of those few Belgian officers and NCOs to keep the blacks out, the city would have been in an uproar, and that could have led to something dreadful. At a time of very important financial interests, you have the mining union there, down there. And of course, Belgian financial circles also wanted to keep the mining union.
Once independent, the leader, the president of Katanga, was none other than Mr. Moise Tshombe, a man with a visceral hatred of Patrice Lumumba. Some even say that he doesn't like Patrice Lumumba because he wasn't included in the famous coalition government. But I think that, in all objectivity, that's a very simplistic view of Mr. Moise Tshombe's essay, because the problem of Katanga with Patrice Lumumba is much deeper and much more complex. Just because you love Patrice Lumumba, you can't reduce this problem to a question of ego and jealousy. Because for a long time, the subject of making Katanga a federation of the Congo came up several times. But Patrice Lumumba, obsessed with his own unity within the Congo, has always rejected this proposal. Obviously, I think he meant well, but subconsciously, I think he frustrated some Katangese who perhaps didn't necessarily like him. But that in no way justifies what happened next. So, Moise Tshombe hates Patrice Lumumba to the core, and just as well, Belgium supports him. Belgium has given him weapons, and it's not just Belgium, because the Katanga mines are of interest to many people. Let me give you a name. You've probably heard in one of my videos Mr. Jacques Foucault Protégé, armed wing of Mr. de Gaulle in Africa in charge of African affairs, the man behind numerous coups d'etat on the African continent, the man who supported numerous dictators on the African continent when he gave France a pass, is still here with his patrons. And he also helps Moise Tshombe and the Katangese because he thought that if Moise Tshombe came out of this undefeated, he would also be able to scratch out 2 or 3 mines. The project is really very dark, so you find Patrice Lumumba up against Moise Tshombe, Belgium and France. And France? But that's not all. Patrice Lumumba felt so cornered that he asked the UN for help. The UN, as always, did absolutely nothing. He asked the United States for help. The United States doesn't feel concerned. And so they feel so cornered that they threaten to turn to the Soviet Union. From that moment on, Patrice Lumumba had dug his own grave. At the time, we were in the middle of the Cold War. The fact that a country announced that it was moving closer to the Soviet Union, the US found the USSR unappealing. It wanted to be independent, or to take even an inch in their conquest of the whole world. So clearly, the then President of the United States, Mr. Eisenhower, was suckled into submitting the Patrice Lumumba dossier. So a little apathy. The next few seconds will be in the conditional tense. Eisenhower would have received the Patrice Lumumba file, and then he would have processed the file in a matter of seconds. He would have said, eliminate him. And his instructions were carried out perfectly, as the US, via the CIA, tried several times to poison Patrice Lumumba.
The substance intended to eliminate Lumumba was poisoned toothpaste, which was to trigger a polio-like illness.
After all these attempts, they realized they had a much easier solution. Why murder someone when you can do it through someone close to you? And who is this relative, Mr. Mobutu? And you're thinking, who the hell is Mobutu? Let me explain. Mobutu is a man who had a square shot in the army. He came out an officer or a non-commissioned officer. I'm not sure. And that's not really my problem. Whatever the case, he got out of the army. He did his little stint in the army. After that, he became a journalist. And often hung out in Belgium. Except that at the same time, the MNC was going to Brussels for their congress, for their meetings. And that's how that Mobutu came several times to their congress and joined the party. He won Patrice Lumumba's confidence. By way of example, once Congo became independent, that Patrice Lumumba became prime minister. Mr. Mobutu, who was an officer, they literally gained a rank, but at lightning speed. He became a colonel because in the party, in the MNC, he was the only one with a military background. You can stop me in my comments if there are things that are not correct. I don't claim to know the whole story. If there are any Congolese who would like to shed some light on the subject, don't hesitate. Roughly speaking, Mobutu had won the confidence of Patrice. Lumumba was confident, but Larry DeVille, an American, saw him in Brussels. Larry DeVille later became the CIA's head of operations in Congo. So Larry DeVille was right on target. Mobutu has won Patrice Lumumba's confidence, and he will be able to gain Mobutu's trust. In any case, he got closer to Mobutu. I think you're starting to get a feel for things. So let's take stock. Patrice Lumumba, Ado, Belgium. Inside Belgium, he's teenaged the government. He loves the king. He loves the industries. Because there are big mining companies. A company now called Unicor. At the time, it was called l'Union. Union Minière, I'm not sure, Union Minière Belge or something like that, which was the company, exploited the Katanga subsoil to the hilt. This company obviously didn't want Patrice Lumumba to have the power he had. So the whole of Belgium is against Patrice Lumumba. Belgium isn't in the conditional tense. Officials confirmed the order to eliminate Patrice Lumumba. That the order was to eliminate Patrice Lumumba, just like the United States. Except that there was dissension within Belgium itself because a fringe of the government wanted Patrice Lumumba eliminated. Patrice Lumumba politically, but King Baudouin wanted him physically eliminated. So you have the United States wanting to eliminate him. You've got Belgium wanting to eliminate him. You've got France supporting the Katangis, hoping to get 2 or 3 mines so they can scrape together a few things. Patrice Lumumba finds himself alone with everyone at his back. And I do mean everyone at his back. They managed to convince Mobutu. They managed to get Joseph Kasavubu in their pockets. And Joseph Kasavubu organized a meeting where he officially announced that Patrice Lumumba, dissatisfied with his tasks, united the West. He brought together the famous High Commission set up by Mobutu.
The mysterious Mr. Kasavubu receives. With solemnity, he will present to foreign ambassadors the College of Young General Commissioners.
Dear compatriots, on the 5th of September, 960, we evoked, in accordance with Article 22 of the Fundamental Law, Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba and certain other ministers. At the same time, we called on Mr. Hileo, my President of the Senate, to form the government, which would then be presented to the chambers. In the face of a situation that was becoming dangerously explosive, Colonel Mobutu, Chief of Staff, to whom I pay tribute, took the initiative of calling on our academics to keep the Republic's public services of the Republic. In the best interests of the nation, we ratified Colonel Mobutu's decision. Then today, we are officially installing this college, which provisionally assumes the country's executive administrative power. Thank you. By sututor.com.
On the evening of September, at around 10 o'clock, Mobutu and certain soldiers from the army that he had paid well, that he had paid handsomely thanks to the money that the CIA had given him, surrounded Patrice Lumumba's house and officially announces that a coup d'etat is underway and that Patrice Lumumba had been neutralized. As a result, he was denied access to a telephone and mail. In short, he's cut off from the world. He's stuck at home. But by sheer force of circumstance, Patrice Lumumba managed to escape from the house by hiding in the car. He gets out, but falls victim to his own popularity. Instead of fleeing, every time he passes through a village, he's spotted and forced to do what he's always done, make a speech. So he makes speeches that please the crowds, except that word spreads like wildfire. At that point, Mobutu's troops will arrest Patrice Lumumba on the road to Kisangani, if I'm not mistaken. Once he's arrested, they'll take Patrice Lumumba back to Leopoldville, now Kinshasa. He will be imprisoned. Except that Patrice Lumumba is a very charismatic person. Without even opening his mouth, he can create crowd movements. He can rouse people. So naturally, the army is going to start a mutiny. The soldiers are officially asking for better living conditions, but above all, they are demanding the release of Patrice Lumumba, because Patrice Lumumba is very, very popular within the country and very popular within the army. When the army had problems with Belgian soldiers, Patrice Lumumba supported the army. But Mobutu, again well arranged and well funded by the CIA, aborted the mutiny by giving the money to whoever he wanted. And very clearly, the Patrice Lumumba problem was very serious because he knew how to imprison Patrice Lumumba. But he didn't know what to do with him, and the situation was getting worse. The population could rise up at any moment. The military could stage a mutiny at any moment. So he pondered the most appropriate solution. So it was that the telegram came directly from Belgium directly, with, of course, the approval of the United States. He ordered that Patrice Lumumba to Katanga. The fact that Patrice Lumumba is being sent to Katanga, it's not trivial, not at all. Just remember that Mobutu's advisor was Louis Marière, a former chief of staff of the Congolese police force. Let me show you the diagram, because it's sold, Mobutu sold, you've got the CIA against him, you've got France against him, you've got Belgium against him, there's Katanga just waiting for the word of command to eat him alive. So in this context, the word of command comes from Belgium, obviously, with the approval of the CIA to transfer Patrice Lumumba to Katanga. But when Patrice Lumumba is told he's to be transferred to Katanga, it's clear that it's his death warrant. So he really refused to go, but was forced onto a plane with other collaborators, including Maurice Impolo and Monsieur Okito, former government ministers and former heads of the Senate, respectively. 60 Sunday, the people arrive in Katanga, and once in Katanga, they will be imprisoned in very dismal conditions. They will be tortured, molested, repeatedly. And in the evening, late at night, they are taken to a forest area away from the general population, where they were murdered. The firing squad included Belgian officers. They were murdered and buried in a hurry. Except that sometime later, Belgium realized that officially to know about their involvement in Patrice Lumumba's assassination or his murder would be self-destructive. You shoot themselves in the foot. So what they're going to do, they're going to start a demonization campaign. They're also going to start a staged event that doesn't say its name. They'll write newspaper articles in which they explain that Patrice Lumumba escaped with his colleagues and that he had been murdered by villagers.
First, here's a summary of our main news. The traitor Lumumba and his fellow prisoners, Okito and Impolo, escaped last night from their place of detention in Kapanga. Today at 11:50. Mr. Godefroy Munongo held a press conference, which we'll read in full because of the seriousness of the events it addressed.
I don't know if you understand a bit, it means they've murdered. The United States knows, Belgium knows, Katanga knows. Mobutu knows about it, Joseph Kasavubu knows about it, but everyone, I will keep quiet and form a story worthy of every name in the book. So, Patrice Lumumba was murdered. But a few days later, they're still running this rumor that the guy's still alive, but that in the end he was murdered by other villagers. And to corroborate their version, no trace of Patrice Lumumba should remain. It was against this backdrop that they sent 2 Belgian officers to make the bodies disappear. The guy was already murdered in very murky conditions because his colleagues were murdered in front of him, executed to show him what he was going to get. But after that, 2 Belgian officers were sent to take the remains of Patrice Lumumba and his friends and dissolve them in acid. All that remained of the body were 2 teeth. We'll come back to those 2 teeth later. But in any case, after the assassination of Patrice Lumumba in Congo, practically everyone knows who murdered him. Everyone knows how it happened. But there's nothing official. So The version will remain latent on the continent, with no one discussing it until a Belgian journalist, not even Congolese but Belgian, wrote a book titled The Assassination of Patrice Lumumba. The journalist's name is Ludovic Hewitt. I've read a few pages of his book. A bit dematerialized, I haven't finished it yet, but it's also enabled me to get further into the video to be able to really corroborate certain things. And it's thanks to him that the investigation will be reopened. And you should know that in this investigation, Belgium has taken care to apologize, or to acknowledge its moral responsibility. Moral, not political or military, moral. I say moral because it's very important. In other words, at no time do they acknowledge, despite all the facts, the fact that Patrice Lumumba was murdered by their commitment, their support, by their financial support, even by their material presence. They have surely acknowledged their moral responsibility. Worse still, when his body was dissolved in acid, there was a Belgian officer who told the story a few years later, I think in the 20s. He proudly told the Belgian artisan how he carried out his dirty work.
The man who was in charge of it, the Belgian, called me into his office. He said, "You're going to take care of this." I said, "I'd like to, but what should I do?" The man who explained all this to me was himself. He had taken part in the whole thing during the night. He had suggested that Lumumba say a prayer before he died. Lumumba refused. This man was completely... and we returned to the same spot. Could you see the massacre? It was obvious. There was even a hand sticking out of the ground. One of the dead. The bodies were cut into pieces. They were buried twice. We cut them into pieces and burned them. We also had a huge quantity of acid that we put in the batteries in cars. And in that, most of the bodies were and then the rest we all burned. But we had to do it without the blacks seeing, in the middle of the forest. That's another problem. There are two of you, there were two of us. And we had to do it all to ourselves. Remove the 3 bodies from the earth. Cut them to pieces, destroy them, and none of this could be known to anyone. And it wasn't known to anybody. Nobody knew that. Some even believe he'll be back. He'll come back with 2 less teeth in front.
And that's how Ludovic Wheat came to ask him, "So Patrice Lumumba's teeth, are you going to give them back or not?" Oh, and he proudly said no. And then he invented a version. He said he took his boat one day, went to the sea, and threw the teeth into the sea.
When did you decide to make the teeth disappear?
What's the matter?
Yesterday or the day before, DeWitt was here telling me that I was going to be accused of murder.
What did you do?
What did you do then?
What did I do?
Or what did I do? When I took my boat out to sea and made them disappear. I'm the only one who knows where. No one will ever find them.
And what about?
And what were you thinking? But I'm finished with the Lumumba affair. I don't want to hear any more about it.
It says the guy was taunting everyone. He knew he wouldn't be bothered, and he really announced Patrice Lumumba's assassination with joy and pride, as if he'd accomplished something real. Lumumba died a few years later, and it was his daughter who willed the authorities, saying she had one of Patrice Lumumba's teeth at home. His house was searched, and the famous tooth was found. But believe me, I've read a lot of stories about imperialism, a lot of stories about the assassinations of African presidents. And in the back of my mind, something tells me that even this tooth isn't the real thing, because there's been no examination. The Belgian authorities said the tooth was too fragile for DNA testing. Do you understand? So the guy was murdered, with everyone plotting, His body was diluted, dissolved in acid. There's a guy who kept this tooth as a prophet, who proudly announced on TV that he'd done it, and who taunted the authorities who never returned the teeth. It was only when he died that his daughter said his tooth was there. His tooth was recovered. And only then, I think that in 2020 or 21, Belgium officially handed over Baptiste Lumumba's remains to the Congo. We had a big reception with the flag of Congo, but in reality it was a big reception with a tooth inside. Belgium's Prime Minister apologized, admitting moral responsibility. Moral responsibility in a vice-like position. And that story traumatized me. I saw the videos of the arrest when I was young. Yeah, I also saw the film that was made about him. But it's always traumatized me because I've always wanted to get to the bottom of it. What hurts me about this story is that Baptiste Lumumba fell with the complicity of the Congolese. It's still the story of our continent. And it's true that we shouldn't stigmatize black people by saying that treachery doesn't exist in everything, but it's serious all the same. And what scandalized me even more was that I found these archives, which I'll put at the end of the video. After his death, the Belgian media continued their demonization campaign. They produced a mini report interviewing people who proudly said they were happy that Baptiste Lumumba had been assassinated, as if this were a method to validate their dirty deeds.
What do you think of Patrice Lumumba's death?
Lumumba is soft like everyone else, isn't he? He's a criminal. Ah, that's a bad thing. Almost everyone regrets it. For me, Lumumba's death, I don't care, because Lumumba caused a lot of deaths in Lulabourg and all over the Congo. As far as I'm concerned, I have no regrets.
I think nothing of Mumba's death. He's a scoundrel of the first category. So, Manuel, yes, are you happy now? Oh, yes, I am.
Still, I'm so happy, not bad. I'm so happy.
Why are you so happy? Because Mumba is dead?
It's just like I told you last time from television, that if that man hadn't died, then we wouldn't be a bit serious because he's dead. I'm so happy. You can even see me laughing because I'm so happy.
But doesn't it bother you that he was murdered like that?
Yes, surely, since he was murdered like that, if it were in my opinion, if it were towards me now, I'd even have to eat it.
If it were in my house, I'd have to eat it, like we eat chikwang.
What do you think we should do with the Lumumbis earlier?
With the Mumistis, if in my opinion, if we arrest them, we can send them away. If I were in the place of the head of state, or if I were, authority, I'd have to send them all to Bakwanga.
Cut off their ears.
Today we cut off the ears, tomorrow we cut off the arms, the next day we cut off the legs and leave them like that. Until they die. Then we take them, we put them like statues, like skeletons.
My friends, this video isn't meant to scandalize you or anything. I'm talking about a very simple principle. In fact, it's the basis for the creation of this YouTube channel. I will very rarely make videos analyzing coup d'etat situations on the continent, because I believe that these videos are made to get views. They're often misguided and you don't get the full picture. That's why I make a lot of videos about the past. Not recent, very distant, to have as many elements as possible, to be as relevant as possible. And two, these videos have a purpose. Know this. The imperialist nations have not changed the processes. The same processes have been revised. If you understand the history of the African continent, if you take the trouble to know it well, believe me, there are things happening right now. Simply by hearing what's going on, you'll be able to understand what's going to happen in the days to come and even in the years to come. These are the same processes. Through the story of Patrice Lumumba, I really want you to be able to understand. Or to understand the methods used to destabilize our countries. I'm not one of those who always blame the Western powers, because I don't think they're totally guilty. The first culprits are us. And we need to do some real work on ourselves. Once we've done some real work on ourselves, believe me, it's going to be very complicated. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't hesitate to subscribe. If you liked it, please share.